Next up, we have a pair of questions from Clemson fans that I felt like needed to go together. We'll start with Andy. I'm generally a pretty pessimistic fan, and the results lately with the Tigers have not given me much reason not to be. However, even with the loss yesterday to Florida State and the general direction of the program lately, I feel like there's some reasons to be positive about this team's future. With some patience and experience, Cade Klubnik could have a pretty high ceiling, especially if he sticks around until his senior year in Garrett Riley's offense. The young wide receivers show a lot of promise, and the 2024 receivers class looks really good, and I'm impressed by the development of the secondary and the recruiting on the defensive line. I know there are a lot of people who seem to think this program is basically dead, but I feel like with a little patience and just a small embrace of the transfer portal, this team's future is really bright. Am I wrong to feel this way? Thanks from a sad Tiger looking for some positivity. And now this one's from Matt. Hi, Andy. It seems undisputed that Dabo Swinney's insistence on almost never using the transfer portal has hurt Clemson, who could very realistically end this year with an 8-4 or 7-5 record. Let's say that Clemson and Dabo decide to amicably part ways at the end of the year, and Clemson brings in a coach who has willingness to use the transfer portal to fill key roster holes. What would you say the ceiling would be for a Clemson team with a new coach that embraces the transfer portal, and how many seasons do you think it would take for Clemson to reach that ceiling? All right, I think Andy is the more realistic of the Clemson fans. I think Andy says he's pessimistic. Matt's the pessimistic one. 8-4 or 7-5. I'm going on based on what I saw on Saturday against Florida State. That team can do a lot better than 8-4 or 7-5. That team has a high ceiling this year. If it plays like that, it's going to win almost everything else. It might drop one more, but 10-2 or 9-3 is very realistic if that team can replicate what it did Saturday. If it plays the way it did against Duke and makes mistakes, then no, there will be a few more losses. But Dabo Swinney amicably partying, all that, no. Unless that's just what he wants to do, that's not going to happen. There should be no pressure on Dabo Swinney to leave. There should be pressure on him to do a few different things. And I think when you look at what Andy said, he's right. If Dabo Swinney just changes a little bit, just tweaks a little bit in terms of roster management, how they handle the transfer portal, I think Clemson could be just fine in the new era. It's not that far off. What you saw against Florida State, and Florida State looks like the best team in the ACC. Now, we'll see. Clemson's still got to play Miami. They might be pretty good this year. They are obviously trying to build a roster that looks like Florida State's or is even better than the one Florida State has now. That's Mario Cristobal's mandate when he got that job. So it will get tougher. But if you're Clemson, you can definitely build on what you have. You know, they've got a bunch of NFL D linemen still. They will continue to do that. They continue to recruit the same types of players they've been recruiting all along. They haven't had the elite quarterback since Trevor Lawrence. But how often do those guys come along? Now, they do need to work on that. But in terms of the portal, if Dabo just dabble in the transfer portal, then I think you got something going there. Think about this. This is a very simplistic way to look at it. But let's say Clemson had been open to taking a receiver out of the transfer portal when Keon Coleman left Michigan State. And Keon Coleman had been open to the idea of a bunch of different schools. He wasn't. He was looking at a pretty limited number of schools. But let's say he was just wide open. Anybody in the country, hit me up. I'll come look. If Keon Coleman were on Clemson instead of on Florida State, who do you think wins that game? Clemson would have won that game. You take Keon Coleman off Florida State, they lose. You put him on Clemson, Clemson wins. It's that simple. And so one player could have turned that. One player probably could make Clemson the best team in the ACC at the right position. You don't have to go wholesale into the transfer portal. You don't have to flip 30 roster spots a year that aren't seniors leaving and freshmen coming in. You don't have to do that. Florida State has embraced the transfer portal. It's been very helpful to them. They've basically set up a system where if they've got a hole, they're going to try to fill it with the best transfer player available right now. Now, I think that's in service of eventually getting to where Clemson is in the high school recruiting piece of it. And if you look, Florida State's high school recruiting has gotten better and better and better. But when Mike Norvell got there, they didn't have they couldn't sell what Clemson could sell. So they had to do something different. They had to adapt. Clemson hasn't had to adapt because they've been getting good high school players. So all they have to do is say, hey, we do have some players who leave each year because they're not playing as much as they'd like to. We can replace those guys out of the portal instead of replacing those guys with high school players who may take a couple years to develop. We can replace them out of the portal with somebody who can be good right now. And the people in the portal are going to look at that and go, oh, I can go play at a place that puts people in the NFL where I'd play alongside a bunch of future NFL players, which could make me look better. I think they're going to do that. I think they're going to want to join that type of program. So it's not like you have to completely overhaul everything you do. It's just a slight tweak, because I don't think Dabo is going to start running people off at Clemson. He's not that type of guy. That's not the program he's built. Continuity is a very important piece of what he's done at Clemson. I always go back to those years. I think it was 2015 to 2018. I did a study when I was at Sports Illustrated. There was a 4-year period where they only lost 7 people to attrition. It's unheard of in college. Even back then, when the transfer rules hadn't changed, it was incredible. Nobody could do that. So that's what they want. They want that level of continuity. They want players to stay in the program. They want to develop them. But they still did lose those 7 to attrition. And now with the transfer portal rules different, that number would be higher. Replace them strategically through the portal. You do that, you're going to get better instantly at certain positions as long as you evaluate well. And if we go through Clemson's history under Dabo Swinney, they tend to evaluate very, very well. So I think that is the solution there. It's not that far off. It doesn't have to be that much different. I realize there's a lot of frustration in the fan base, which happens when you're used to that level of success that they've been able to sustain for that long. I don't think it's necessarily possible to sustain that going forward as dominant as they were, because Florida State has simply gotten better, because Miami is getting better, because North Carolina has gotten better. I think it's going to be more crowded at the top of the ACC just because other programs have finally started to pull their weight. But Clemson can stay at the top. They can be in that group. They just have to tweak a little bit. Again, go back to that Florida State game. You take Keon Coleman off Florida State, you put him on Clemson. That would be the difference in the game. And it doesn't have to necessarily be him. It could have been, another top player in the transfer portal, whether it was a receiver, whether it was an offensive lineman. All you got to do is take the right ones, 1 or 2, 2 or 3. I'm not saying 20. It's doable. It's doable. And you don't have to run off Dabo to do it. I think Dabo is smart enough to recognize what's going on and realize you can adjust without throwing out everything you've ever done. Now, that's not something you can solve this season, but it is something you can begin preparing to solve in the offseason. And I do think Dabo's smart enough to do that. So we'll see what happens, but it's not that drastic of a change, and they could be just fine. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.